Coming out hot on the heels of Harvest Moon 64, which was released in Japan in February 1999, Harvest Moon 2 hit shelves just 6 months later in August of 1999. The fourth entry in the still new Harvest Moon franchise, Harvest Moon 2, would be the second handheld entry, this time debuting on the equally new Game Boy Color, which had come out just the year prior. By now, you may have noticed a pattern in these releases, that being the alternating between a console release and a handheld release. And that's largely due to there being two separate teams working in tandem, one dedicated to the console games and one to the handheld. This would not only continue the pattern of alternating releases for a time, but ensure a robust handheld library of Harvest Moon games with their own identity. As I've mentioned previously, I missed out on the first 3 handheld Harvest Moon games, so this was my first time playing through Harvest Moon 2. And while it feels a bit like a step back from Harvest Moon 64, it's definitely 2 steps forward from the first Game Boy game. The story of Harvest Moon 2 is thus. In the face of a dying town, the mayor is offered a deal to build an amusement park where the old, abandoned farm is. Before he can agree, the player character runs in and offers to try to revitalize the farm, and the town by proxy instead. You are then given 3 years to accomplish this. It's simple, but it's a refreshing change from the previous games, which were all about taking over your grandfather's farm after his passing. Once again, you are given the choice of playing as either a boy or a girl, something notably lacking in Harvest Moon 64. After choosing your character and watching the little opening cutscene, players are released into the town, and much like the SNES game, they are tasked with greeting everyone before they can leave. This is the game's not-so-subtle way of making sure players know where everything is, along with handing them their basic tool set and letting them choose between a cat or dog as their pet. There is a set of 9 buildings in town, once again named Flowerbud Village, and they're placed in a 3x3 grid. The layout is very similar to previous games, with a little bit of shuffling here and there. In the top row, you have the mayor's house, the church, and the flower shop. In the middle row, you have the carpenter, the clinic, and the tool shop. And in the last row, you have the library, the restaurant, and the animal shop. Finally, north of the town, you have the town square, which has a bulletin board and is where certain characters will spend their time on their days off or during certain events. The buildings in town are almost all utilitarian, with the mayor's house being the only exception. Players can't enter this building, and it really only serves as a setting for the opening and ending cutscenes. The church next door allows players to pray once a day and raise their happiness, which, just like in previous games, is a stat that contributes to their final score. The flower shop is where players can buy seeds for crops, flowers, and a new addition, herbs. The carpenter is where, with enough money and lumber, players can build or upgrade buildings on their farm. The clinic provides checkups and will let players know if they're healthy, in need of rest, or even heal them if they're exhausted. The tool shop is where players can buy extra tools for their farm beyond the basic starting set, such as the milker or saddle. The library is where players can look at photo albums or trade with other players. The restaurant supplies meals that can restore stamina, and the animal shop is where players can buy livestock along with some animal supplies such as feed or the brush. Like all previous games, the exit east of town leads to the crossroads. From there, the northern exit leads to Moon Mountain, which also closely resembles that of the SNES game. Here you can find wood stumps to chop, items to forage, and a hot spring to rest in. Notably, there's no mountain summit or cave like in previous titles, though there is a new one-way shortcut at the top that can bring players back to the farm without trekking all the way back down the mountain and through the crossroads. Which leads us to the game's last location, the farm. And while the farm shares similarities to the previous games, it's perhaps also the most changed of the 3 locations. Starting out, you have your house, your horse stable, your barn, and your coop, all in relatively the same places as the games before. Notably, however, there is no shipping bin, watering hole, or, most importantly, a field for planting crops in the main screen. Instead, the farm has been expanded into multiple screens. Players can now pass through the barn and coop into 2 adjoining fields out back. Both of these fields have shipping bins and are where players can plant grass and have their animals graze. Moving south of the farm, players will find their field, where they can plant and harvest their crops, after the mandatory rock, stump, and weed cleanup, of course. A river flows on the south side of the field where players can refill their watering cans. And to the west, yet another screen contains a small peninsula with a pond, where players can store fish they've caught. Having come directly from playing Harvest Moon 64, of course the world feels a little small again, but it's a huge improvement from the first Game Boy title. It's great to have both the town and the mountain back as full maps to run around in. and the small changes along with the expansion to the farm make the game feel fresh and innovative compared to its handheld predecessor. There are of course more buildings and features that can be added to the farm, but we'll get to those in due time. For now, let's talk about menus. Look, both the SNES and first Game Boy games lacked menus and a proper inventory, and after finally getting a taste of one in Harvest Moon 64, I was dreading going back to not having one. Let me be excited for this. But yeah, Harvest Moon 2 has a somewhat proper menu and inventory. I say somewhat proper because, like many aspects of this game, it's a step back from the 64 title, but a step forward from the first Game Boy game. Pressing the select button will bring up your inventory, which shows the date, time, and amount of gold the player has at the top, along with 4 tool slots and which, if any, tool is currently equipped down at the bottom. Pressing select a second time will bring up a second submenu. Here you can check on the status of your animals, what seeds you have in stock, and what holidays are happening that season. Players can also pull up a map, check the Q&A section for game help, or enable the memo option, which will show the date, time, and tool selected at the bottom of the screen when the menu is closed. Unfortunately, this window does take up about a fourth of the screen, but I personally found it worth it just so I could see the time and my tool without having to go into the menu. All that said, there's still no item inventory in the game, so you can only hold one crop, produce, or foraged item at a time. And while it's nice to have a small inventory for tools, having only 4 slots is a bit limiting, but I'll get to that in a second. First, let's go over livestock. Taking a cue from the 64 title, Harvest Moon 2 offers players cows, chickens, and sheep. However, only cows and chickens will be available to players starting out, as the sheep require a little extra work. Cows can be purchased from the animal shop for 5,000 gold and require 6 plots, or 54 squares, of grass to be planted and growing before players are allowed to make said purchase. Chickens cost 1,000 gold and need even more grass, requiring 9 plots or 81 squares of grass to be planted. Each animal also has its own field, so the grass planted for cows doesn't count towards the grass planted for chickens, and vice versa. That's a lot. And at 500 gold per bag, it might be a while before you can buy your first animal. I didn't look up those requirements before playing, so I found myself constantly planting grass, waiting for it to grow, then going back to Chet at the animal shop only to be told I still didn't have enough grass. Now, unlike Harvest Moon 64, sheep don't share the barn with cows. They have their own barn, which you might have noticed is not on the farm when you start the game, like the cow barn and chicken coop are. Players will have to get the carpenter to build the sheep pen, which requires 70,000 gold and 800 wood. Once built, this will add a third grazing screen, which needs 16 plots of grass, or 144 squares, planted and growing before Chet will sell you a sheep. That's just about the entire sheep field. Each barn or coop can hold a total of 4 animals, and players can choose to fill them by buying more or breeding their existing ones. Chicken eggs can be incubated, and cows and sheep need to be made pregnant with a miracle potion. Just like in previous games, this process takes longer, but will give the newly born animals a small affection boost. Baby cows, baby sheep, and chicks can also only be acquired this way, and while they serve no function other than being an added stage of development, they're really stinking cute. Now, chickens don't really require any extra care, you just have to feed them daily and they'll happily lay eggs on their own. Cows and sheep, however, require some extra tools. Just like in Harvest Moon 64, cows need the milker to be milked and a brush to raise their affection. However, unlike the 64 game, the brush can't be used on the sheep. Instead, along with the clippers for collecting wool, sheep now require the shampoo tool to raise their affection. And the new tools don't stop there. Just like in Harvest Moon 64, you have the bell to call your cows in and out of the barn. However, this tool is now exclusively for cows. Chickens and sheep now have their own calling tools, that being the whistle for chickens and the horn for sheep. Now, on one hand, the addition of these tools does give some extra variety. Sorta. It's mostly an aesthetic difference, as the brush and shampoo, for example, serve the same function. They're just now split between individual livestock. And remember, players only have 4 tool slots. If players want to milk, shear, and groom both their cows and sheep, their tool inventory is already full with the brush, clippers, shampoo, and milker. They'll have to return to the house to trade out tools if they also want to move animals in and out of their respective barns. While I appreciate the attempt at adding some variety, these new tools don't really change the game that much, and actually add more needless back and forth as they feel like they were implemented without fully considering what the player can carry at any given time. Honestly, I quickly gave up on grooming my cows and sheep so as not to have to make so many back and forth trips. Their affection is still raised by talking to them, as well as collecting milk and wool, albeit slower. But since there are no cow or sheep contests, and the difference between small and large produce is only 50 to 100 gold, I wasn't really in a huge hurry to raise their affection anyway. I also completely ignored moving any animals into the field and simply fed them in their respective barn or coop. But moving on, cows, chickens, and sheep produce milk, eggs, and wool. Cows can produce small or large milk depending on their affection level, and sheep will do the same with small or large wool. Chickens will typically only produce one standard kind of egg. That is, unless you can trade them. If the player has a link cable and another friend with Harvest Moon 2, the two can trade their chickens, which will grant each of them a golden chicken. That golden chicken will, of course, lay golden eggs, which sell for a whopping 500 gold, as opposed to the standard 50. These eggs can also be incubated to produce a whole coop of golden chickens. But good luck doing that these days. And if you're playing on a modern port or ROM like I am, you're unfortunately out of luck. There are also machines you can buy to produce milk and wool into new produce. Just like the first Game Boy game, players can acquire cheese and butter makers for milk, and with the addition of sheep, they can also buy a yarn maker and knitter for wool, which will produce yarn or knitwear. Much like in the first Game Boy game, these are a good way to make some extra money, but we still see a bit of a difference without distinction problem. Butter, cheese, yarn, and knitwear all sell for the exact same amount of money, that being 300 gold, and they will take the same amount of time to produce, so it's really only up to player preference which they want to make. And before we move on, I'd be remiss not to note the ability to have either black or brown cows now. The colors are chosen randomly and don't affect anything other than aesthetics. And since these are the same cow models as previous games, we know how they rank. Moving on to crops. Each season features 3 crop options, croptions if you will. However, only 2 will be available to players depending on the gender they chose. In spring, asparagus will be available to both players, while girls will have access to potatoes and boys will have turnips. Melons will be available to both players in summer, with girls having corn and boys having tomatoes. In fall, sweet potatoes will be available to both players, while girls will get eggplants and boys get peanuts. Finally, in winter, both players get Napa cabbage, with girls getting carrots and boys getting broccoli. Beyond being an aesthetic change, there is some variation in the crops available to the 2 genders. For the spring and summer crops, the crops exclusive to girls will sell for a little more. However, the ones exclusive to boys take less time to grow. And when it comes to autumn and winter, both sets of gender-locked crops will sell for the same price. However, the girls' crops will grow faster but be a one-time harvest, while the boys' crops will grow slower but will continue to regrow all season long. This means that while there's variation, neither gender is getting an objectively better performing set of crops. And while these crops are gated off based on your farmer of choice, there are a couple ways to get your hands on all of them. The first method is choosing the cat as your pet. See, both animals play their own roles. The dog will protect your livestock at night so you can leave them out without worry of them being hassled by wild animals. Meanwhile, the cat will occasionally find seeds and leave them in your storage bin, including seeds normally only available to the gender you didn't choose. It's not super common or reliable, and it does seem that the cat will only find seeds for the current season. But it does work, and I would occasionally find a new bag of seeds in my storage and was eventually able to plant every crop at least once. The other method is the trading system. Along with livestock, players can also trade crop seeds with one another, and if each player chooses a different gender, they can exchange those game-exclusive seeds. I suppose I sort of understand the reasoning behind this mechanic. Remember, Pokemon Red and Blue were still at the top of the charts, with Pokemon Yellow releasing the same year as Harvest Moon 2. And we all know how big the trading mechanic was emphasized in those games, with certain Pokemon being completely gated off behind which version people bought. I can only assume this was an attempt to capitalize a little on that same gimmick. That said, I imagine it was harder to find another friend with Harvest Moon 2 than it was someone who had one of the multi-million units of Pokemon sold. Not to mention the fact that each Pokemon still had over 100 Pokemon still available to players who couldn't trade. Meanwhile, Harvest Moon 2 only has 12 crops, with a third of them gated behind gender. And let's be honest, trading crops just doesn't have the same je ne sais quoi of trading a fun little creature. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, there is a new addition to the seed lineup, that being herbs and flowers. Now, unlike crops, these can't be planted in the main field and will instead require the construction of the hothouse. This will run players 600 wood and 50,000 gold. That's not the most expensive building to construct, but it's up there. The hothouse functions similarly to the greenhouse in Harvest Moon 64, in that things planted inside will grow all year round, regardless of season. However, it's exclusively for flowers and herbs and comes with its own quirks. For starters, the hothouse has 2 rooms, one for flowers and one for herbs, and these plants will not grow in the room not assigned to them. Secondly, before anything can be planted, players have to buy at least 1 flower pot. Each pot can grow exactly 1 herb or flower plant, and each room of the hothouse can hold 16 pots, or 32 pots in total. At 200 gold per pot, that's another 6,400 gold if players want to fill up the entire hothouse. There are 4 flower seeds and 4 herb seeds in total. However, just like with crops, half are gated off behind gender, with girls having access to lavender, orchids, chamomile, and rosemary, while boys have access to geranium, primrose, sage, and saffron. And unfortunately, like crops, seeds for the other gender can't be found by the cat, and players must trade in order to acquire them all. Harvesting herbs and flowers is also not as straightforward as standard crops, as they require a new tool, scissors, which are needed to cut the herbs so they can be sold. Herbs and flowers are also all a one-time harvest, meaning once you harvest one, you have to replant. And once again, just like with the livestock, we have a tool juggling problem. Your watering can or sprinkler, scissors, and 2 seeds will fill up the tool inventory. If you want to plant more than one type of herb and flower, you'll be running back and forth between the hothouse and toolbox. And if I may gripe for a second, when the sprinkler waters a 9x9 area, why are the pots set up in rows of 4? You can't even water the top and bottom rows at the same time. It bothers me. All in all, the hothouse is actually kind of tedious. Which is a shame because after playing the 64 title, I was really gunning to get it as soon as I could. Having a way to grow things all year round with time not being a factor while doing so sounded great, but it's not that. The new scissors tool is especially egregious to me. Why do I need them when I can harvest normal crops with my hands? I know in real life people use scissors to harvest herbs, but that's generally because when doing so, you're only taking a small snip, whatever you need for your recipe. It might make more sense then if the herbs and flowers were multi-harvest plants, but they're not. They're all one-and-dones, which means constant juggling of tools and seeds. And to top it all off, it's not like herbs and flowers even have a huge profit margin to make it all worth it. I like the addition of all of these things, in theory. They could have added a lot of extra texture and variety to the game, which is part of why it's so frustrating that it falls short. I suppose it is, at least, a small blessing that tool upgrades don't apply to any of the new tools, and are still relegated to the main set, which we've covered in previous videos. And unlike the first Game Boy game, none are tied to the timer function, and happen mostly through events or befriending townspeople. Which, yes, you can actually befriend some of the townsfolk in this game. Now, there's still no marriage, but simply having that social aspect back feels nice. There are a total of 8 characters you can befriend, all of them being the various shop owners. There's Mary at the library, Ken at the carpenter's, Daisy at the flower shop, Chet at the animal shop, Kane at the church, Bill at the tool shop, Rosie at the restaurant, and Chocola, Rosie's sister, who takes over in year 3. You can't befriend Will, Bill's twin brother, unless you consider them as a set and assume you're befriending both at once. And oddly, you can't befriend the doctor or nurse at the clinic, despite them having character portraits. Now, Harvest Moon 2 functions very much like its Game Boy predecessor, in that you see the character portraits when you enter their shops. When inside, you have the option to talk to them, which will give you a bit of dialogue. This is the main way to befriend people in the game, as talking to them once a day raises friendship, just like it did in Harvest Moon 64. And honestly, I'm glad I looked into that a bit before playing, so I knew that talking to these characters in their shop was raising their friendship. I don't think I would have known otherwise, and wouldn't have actively talked to each character in their shop, as I would have assumed that was just some filler NPC dialogue. You can technically give people gifts, but that's exclusive to Sundays, the one day of the week when the shops are closed and characters hang out in town or in the square. And remember, with no item inventory, that means you have to carry an item in your hands all the way to town just to gift one person. Honestly, I didn't really gift people all that much in my playthrough, as talking to them was easy enough. There are no hearts or diaries to snoop in to see how much people like you, but their daily dialogue will change every time they level up. Each character has 5 levels of friendship, with the exception of Chocola, as you can only befriend her in the last year, thus she has 3 levels. And you can easily see how friendly you are with each shopkeeper by noting which daily dialogue they have. Now, I would have thought friendship contributes to which ending you get, but it apparently doesn't. At least not according to the one site I was even able to find this information on. But they do help you get some items, as characters will gift you super tools once leveled up, or have a new item or 2 available in their shop. And speaking of socializing, Harvest Moon 2 also has its own set of holidays and events as well. The dates for the holidays can be found in the menu, and while there's not nearly as many as in Harvest Moon 64, each season has at least one. Spring has the New Year Festival, the Horse Race, and the Flower Festival. The New Year Festival will find a couple characters in the town square celebrating, with one offering you a drink. Just like in the previous games, players can't attend this in their first year, as the game starts on the first of the season. Likewise, players can't attend the first horse race, as they won't yet have a horse. The Flower Festival once again finds a couple characters hanging out in the town square, viewing the blooming cherry blossoms. There isn't much to do, but attending will grant players a photograph to mark the event. Summer is the only season that hosts just one event, that being the Star Festival. Again, go to the town square, this time after 6 p.m., and you can find characters viewing the stars. Autumn has the Moon Viewing Festival, the Autumn Horse Race, and the Harvest Festival. The moon viewing is less formal and honestly not much of a festival. It takes place on the mountain at night, and only Mary and the player will attend. It will, at least, give the player another photograph. The Autumn Horse Race, much like the Spring one, can't be attended the first year, but they both function very much the same. To spur your horse forward, players must alternate pressing the A and B buttons as quickly as possible. This sounds easy, but I found it surprisingly difficult to do fast enough, and wasn't actually able to win a race until my final year in the game. The prize for winning is either money or seeds depending on the season, and players will, again, receive a photo for the occasion. The Harvest Festival takes a little more effort than most, as it requires the player to plan ahead a little and bring an item for the event. Players must bring either milk, butter, or cheese to Rosie at the restaurant. Once given, they can then participate in the festival and receive yet another photograph. Winter has the Giving Thanks Festival and the Holy Night Festival. The Giving Thanks Festival is a bit like Valentine's, with either Rosie or Bill giving the players baked goods, depending on the player's chosen gender. These gifts are actually from Chocola or Will, who are both too shy to deliver the gifts themselves. Finally, the Holy Night Festival is a time to pray to the goddess for blessings in the coming year. Players have a list of things they can wish for, all of which will be granted, save for the wish for wealth, which will earn the player mockery from the goddess. There are also a variety of events in the game, some random, and some taking place on a specific day or in a specific season. Most of these are just silly or lighthearted events that give a little more life and personality to the various characters, though some can actually net the player something, like the photo you can get from the snowball fight. Another notable one would be Chet and Rosie's wedding. In Year 3, the two will marry, and Chocola will take over the restaurant in her sister's place. It's a cute little event that makes the characters feel a little more dynamic, and I wish there had been just a little more of that. Something you may have noticed in that list of holidays and events is the mention of photographs. And yes, Harvest Moon 2 brings back collecting photos from the 64 game, albeit in a slightly different manner. Of course, there are the photos mentioned above, which are earned from attending certain events. There are also a couple more event photos for your birthday, attending the snowball fight, and successfully completing the game. There are also photos for plants, fish, and insects. And yes, you heard that right, insects. A new tool in Harvest Moon 2 is the bug net, which can be used to catch various bugs in spring, summer, and autumn. Sorry, Animal Crossing, but Harvest Moon did it first. Albeit in a much more limited way, and it wouldn't be a feature to stick around in many future titles. Similarly, the fishing album catalogs the fish species you catch, marking the first time in the series where the game has distinct fish species and not merely small, medium, and large variations. Unlike the insects, all fish can be caught at any time of year and aren't locked to certain bodies of water. Finally, the plant album shows which hothouse plants the player has successfully grown and harvested. It doesn't count any field crops, and unfortunately, this makes it the one album players will be unable to complete without trading. All of these albums can be found in the library, and you even have the option to print them out by hooking your Game Boy up to the Game Boy printer. Honestly, if anyone still has a functioning Game Boy printer, I'd love to see one of these printed out. I really like the addition of the photos in this game. While it could be hectic trying to collect all of them in the 64 title, they were fun, and it made you feel accomplished for getting them, so it's cool to see them make a return in the Game Boy game. I especially like that all of the event photos feature both Pete and Sarah. This not only means that no one feels left out depending on which gender they chose, but almost makes it feel like you're playing with the other character along the way. Like my last video, I have a couple of odds and ends I want to mention, but no elegant segue to them, so here we go. Power berries. There are once again 10 berries players can find that will increase their max stamina. Unlike previous games, which had a variety of ways players had to find or earn these berries, Harvest Moon 2 is much more simple and straightforward. All 10 berries are in the fields, and simply need to be dug up. They're not even in any specific field or square, and have a chance to appear every time the player digs. Dig enough, and you'll eventually find them all. And speaking of stamina, the clinic in town actually plays a role. While the character can still roughly gauge how tired their farmer is by their animations, the clinic will give a more precise reading. Simply visit, and the doctor or nurse will tell you if you're in good health, needing a bit of recovery from food or the hot spring, or in need of immediate rest. If it's the latter, the player will be forced to rest at the clinic until the end of the day, wherein they go home and go to sleep. This will use up the rest of the player's day and force them on to the next, but it will also heal their stamina so they don't end up sick. That makes it fairly handy to use at the end of the day, once all the chores are done, but the player is worried they overexerted their farmer. There are games the player can buy to play on their TV at home. One is a mole-whacking game, one is a sliding puzzle, and the last is the horse race minigame. They're fine. I bought them just for the sake of collection, but they're all fairly simple and don't really get you anything, so I didn't play them much, if at all. There's no mining or caving in this game. It's just they're completely gone. I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe they decided to try trading it for the added bug catching? I don't know, but it isn't here for some odd reason. The game sprites are the same as the first Game Boy game, but the color palette has been altered. I actually didn't realize this until I went to check some footage from the first game and felt blinded by the bright colors. Harvest Moon 2 went for a much more muted palette, and honestly I like it. You may think it's a bit too beige, but I liked it and found it easier on my eyes than the very yellow-tinted first game. So that all brings me to the end of the game. After your 3 years are up, it's time for your evaluation and final score, which will determine which of the 3 endings you get. One ending is simply failure. Failing to accomplish enough on your farm will result in a negative score, and the player is given the option to start over and try again, or give up and let the farmland be turned into an amusement park. I can only find one site that listed what the requirements for the bad ending are, so take them with a grain of salt. Those requirements, as listed, are: have 9 or less happiness points, have 1,999 gold or less, ship less than 100 items, have 0 animals, find 3 or fewer power berries, and never expand your farmhouse. Honestly, you pretty much have to try to do that, and would have to essentially just sleep through much of the game. The other 2 endings are more positive, with one being the normal good ending and the other being the best ending. The normal ending, as you can likely guess, means accomplishing more than what the bad ending would take, but not quite achieving the goals for the best ending. A fairly average playthrough, basically. The best ending, on the other hand, requires meeting a couple goals. Again, I could only find one site listing these requirements, which are as follows: have 70 or more happiness points, have 10,000 gold or more, ship 10,000 or more items, have at least 3 of each animal, find all 10 power berries, and have the 3rd home expansion built. Now, a moment ago I said take the bad ending requirements with a grain of salt. That's because I can say for a fact that those listed requirements for the best ending aren't 100% accurate. I don't know where that number for shipped items came from, but you definitely don't need to ship 10,000 items. To sell that many items in 3 years, players would need to sell roughly 28 items a day. Considering that's outright impossible to do in the early game, and that some days players won't be able to sell anything at all due to, say, a storm, that average is probably more like 35 to 45 items a day. For the record, I sold about 5,600 items and got the best ending. So yeah, nowhere near 10k. My search to try to find more information on these endings was not very fruitful, due to this game not being a terribly popular entry in the franchise. But I was able to find one site that corroborated my experience. I initially thought this cute little webpage was another leftover from a bygone internet era, but no, this entry was from 2025. God bless the maker of this site. And that's it. Much like the previous games, players can continue to farm as long as they like, but little else is really going to happen from there on out. Honestly, I like and appreciate this game for what it is, and for the new steps it took for the series, but it's also one I likely won't ever return to. I really do like some of the expanded ideas it had, like the herbs and flowers, or with the bug catching. And while it still reuses a number of aspects from the previous titles, it clearly was trying to be its own thing and bring new ideas to the table. And for me, playing this game for the first time after all these years, having already played a good number of other entries before it, Harvest Moon 2 was like playing a dream version of Harvest Moon. Like, you know when you're describing a dream and you say some annoying shit like, "It was my home, but like not my home. But in my dream it was my home, you know?" Don't worry, we've all said it. But it's like that as a game, at least for me. Its similarity to previous games makes it feel very familiar, but at the same time, it isn't like those previous games. It's new, but not like totally new. It's not a sequel or remake, and Mary's here as the only returning character for some reason. So, is it an alternate universe? Like I said, for me it was very dreamlike in that way, which was a neat, albeit completely not universal experience. That said, it was also a very flawed experience in some ways. The overabundance of tools made things feel clunky, and it was a bummer to go back to having no item inventory. It definitely accomplished more than the first Game Boy game, but it still feels small and hampered by hardware limitations, especially after having just played the 64 title. I appreciate what the dev team went for, but it would be far from a top contender if I were recommending Harvest Moon games to someone. But that's just me. Tell me what you think. I would be especially interested to know how many of you played it back in the day when it was new. As always, thanks for watching my little videos on farming sims. It means a lot to me. The next game on the list is Harvest Moon Back to Nature, so that's going to take some time. I don't expect to get that out until much later in the year, and considering these games only grow in size from here, that might become the norm. So thank you in advance for your patience. So, until then.